Go ahead, Mr. David. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'm going to talk about Manisha. Well, Manisha asked me to choose a subject, and this is one of my favorite subjects in the class Sociology of the Body at Mount Royal University. So I'm going to talk about various aspects of clothing and the symbolism behind it and what it means and what it has meant historically. This first PowerPoint presentation is called Race, Class, and Fashion, Dandies and Hipsters. So let's, without further ado, let's begin. Some of you might be old enough to remember Don Cherry, big hockey commentator of Canada, and he was known for his thousands of jackets that looked like this. So, he was called the ultimate dandy. So he was our Canadian dandy, if you like. But anyway, I want to begin with a song. So during the American Revolution, now remember that the United States got its independence in 1776, but in the early 1770s, they were fighting against the British, and the British sang this derogatory song toward the American rebels, right? And we all know it. We all might have sang it. Yankee Doodle went to town, riding on a pony, stuck a feather in his hat, and called it macaroni. Now, we've sung that song and really not thinking about it, but if you kind of think about that, um, why would somebody stick a feather in his hat and name it after a piece of pasta? That doesn't make sense. That's sort of weird. So, but if you look at it a little bit deeper, macaroni in this song did not mean the pasta. It meant something else, okay? So, I want to talk about that something else and what it meant, then I'll come back to the song. But the only macaroni as a dish, I mean, was not popular in North America or England until, at least after World War II, kind of thing. But anyway, in the 1700s, rich boys would have their formal education till the age of, say, 15 or 16. They all look like this. And then they would go on Le Grand Tour, the big tour. So they would have 4 or 5 carriages, one for them, another one for their hats and their clothing, big hat boxes, another one for their servants and other supplies. And they would tour Europe and they would stay at all the nice mansions, and they would take lessons in fencing and dancing, riding, courtly behavior, and all this sort of thing. But at one point, they stopped off in Italy in a small town, was on the way, and they developed, a liking for this very little known dish called macaroni. Now, because of that, the servants who, had contempt for these spoiled little boys, called them the macaroni. And that name stuck so much so that you have here some cartoons of the 1700s. But what it meant to be macaroni was to have this overly affected demeanor, highly exaggerated clothing, highly exaggerated mannerisms, effeminate mannerisms, fastidious eating, and all that sort of thing. For example, they had 4-foot wigs, and here you see one boy, and he's putting his hat on his wig with a sword, which is the only way he could do it. But there we go. But anyway, so this is the way they walked around, and they were called the macaroni. And anything cool, anything really sort of very cool became macaroni. I think that's, I mean, that's a great word. We should bring that back, like saying, oh, wow, that's very macaroni, but that's exactly what they did. Um, Now, what they were doing was, um, making fun of the hypocritical trappings of their class by exaggerating everything. They exaggerated their clothes. They exaggerated their manners. They would go to, they would go to the fancy balls and they would say, "How do you do, monsieur?" And speak like this. And of course, people had contempt for them. They thought they were idiots. But they were teenage boys rebelling against the hypocritical, what they thought was the hypocritical trappings of their class, right? Now we go back to the song here. So anything cool was macaroni during the day. Um, so the song Yankee Doodle went to town. Now, a doodle in the time was an idiot, a simpleton, an idiot, a buffoon. Fun fact, doodle was eventually shortened and it became dude, so we still use that today, but we don't mean an idiot. So Yankee Doodle went to town riding on a pony. He stuck a feather in his hat and he was such an idiot that he thought merely sticking this feather in his hat made him macaroni. But obviously, it didn't make him macaroni. He needed a lot more to make him macaroni. So that's what the song means. But it was one of the the first instances of dandyism. But it was again, it had this purpose of trying to call attention to the hypocrisy of the upper classes. So that was the first thing. Now, years later, England, France, Italy, you had a lot of these type of gentlemen walking around in the street. The first two are paintings. The third one is Oscar Wilde, right? Now, they would basically walk around with perfect physical appearance. Their ties would be absolutely perfectly done. Their pants were perfectly pressed and ironed, and their mustaches and beards were perfectly groomed, and all this sort of thing. But what they were trying to do is say that the opposite of what the macaroni said. They say that the aristocracy was what everybody should strive for. And they are basically in dressing like this, trying to imitate and possibly even be mistaken for and act like the upper class, right? Um, the modern example, if people remember the show Frasier, so here's Frasier and his brother Niall Crane, and they were the ultimate dandies, and they were always putting on airs and dressing impeccably, and all of this sort of thing. Well, this started in the 1830s in Europe. Um, the ultimate dandy was Oscar Wilde. This is a picture of Oscar Wilde. But he would dress this way in an exaggerated way to poke fun at the upper classes. However, most of the dandies, like you see in the bottom here at the time, were trying to rebel against this growing trend towards egalitarianism, the preposterous idea that all of us are created equal. Good heavens, we're not created equal. Some of us are better than others, they thought. And they basically dressed this way and they acted this way. So, somebody would have, if they were standing in the street and somebody would have come up to them and said, excuse me, can you give me directions to, here and there? They might answer, pardon me, sir, are you addressing me? And in a very sort of snobbish way. But it was all about clothing, but the clothing was a rebellion against the idea that everybody should be equal. Thomas Carlyle, 1795. Yeah, he was born in 1795. So this is what he said about dandies. A dandy is a clothes-wearing man, a man whose trade, office, and existence consists in the wearing of clothes. Every faculty of his soul, spirit, person heroically is to this one object, the wearing of clothes wisely and well, etc., etc. So it's all about clothes. It's all about performativity. Now, what's interesting is that today, when we say a dandy, we kind of mean somebody who's kind of effeminate, right? This is where this idea came from. That, to be a dandy, you have to borrow from feminine behavior, or as it was defined as such back in those days, and it became the antithesis of masculinity. Um, Now, basically, so you have this sort of heteronormative um, system within one single sex. You have very, very masculine men who sort of were gruff and they became soldiers. And then on the opposite side of the scale, you had dandies who were very, very refined and effete and all this sort of thing. So um, anyway, so that eventually became morphed with homosexuality. A dandy is a gay man is a dandy. And these were, this was conflated for, a couple of hundred years and still is actually. So there we go. Now, fast forward to the 1990s, there was the emergence of another type of a man, which probably still exists in some way, but it's called, he was called the metrosexual. Now, the stereotype of masculine at the time was somebody who was crumpled, creased, crass, unshaven, swore a lot, all of this sort of thing. And he was the opposite. Here's somebody who was well groomed, fashionable, spent a lot of money on on properly grooming his hair, and finding the latest fashions, and also body maintenance with manscaping and all that sort of thing. Um, and this was really one of the first times that men became consumers. They were great for capitalism because they bought all the expensive stuff. Before that, say if you go down to the 1950s, with very few exceptions like cars and guns, generally men, their clothes were bought for them by women. Your mother would buy your clothes, and then your wife would buy your clothes. Most male underwear, for example, had traditionally been bought by women. So these guys were not only buying their own underwear, but they're spending 30, 40, $50 a pair on them. As they had to look good everywhere. So that's the modern dandy. All right, part two. We're looking at dandyism and race, dandyism and ethnicity. So let's take a look here. Now, here is a Indian theorist, from India, and his name is Homi Bhabha. Brilliant, brilliant man, but he studied colonialism all his life, and he came up with this idea which he calls hybridity. And what that means is under a system of colonialism, when we have the dominant class and the oppressed, which is, what colonialism is all about. We have, that the people in the oppressed class will imitate the dominant group as much as possible in appearance, dress, and manner. So India under British rule gave rise to these impeccably dressed Indian men displaying all the manners and class trappings of the British aristocracy, right? They would come up to a British man and say, how do you do, sir? Do you think we're going to have a spot of rain today? And this sort of confused the British colonials because, in the words of Homi Bhabha, they didn't know how to treat them. And his quote is, "They're just like us, but not quite," right? This young man who's impeccably dressed is Gandhi, who was Oxford educated. Before he brought India to independence, he was an Oxford lawyer. So there we go. But it's called hybridity, and it happens during colonialism. Now, back during the slave days, this is prior to 1865 in the United States, the only well-dressed black men were basically the servants in the grand plantations, the grand houses, right? And they would answer the door and they would serve their masters in white gloves and all that sort of thing. There were also free black men, who were not slaves, and they often dressed well as well. But generally, the vast majority were field slaves, and they wore a little more than rags and hand-me-downs. So now, at the same time, traditional masculinity had been denied to black men who were slaves at the time, right? If a traditional man and masculinity is defined as a protector and provider for his family, well, obviously, black men could not do this because they were slaves. They could not protect their wives and daughters, because they were slaves. Yeah. Anyway, slavery was abolished in 1865. African Americans, by proclamation, became free men. But that wasn't the end of, obviously, was not the end of racism, right? So, it began, a new era of racism. But you had a lot of black men who were poor, um, but they would have these nice suits. They may be old, they may be a little bit frayed and tattered, but very often they would wear them and repair them as best as possible and walk around town like this. But it's the idea that dressing well was a sign that one is respectable, and it was therefore a sense of empowerment for them, right? Um, so you see the difference. The British dandies of the 1830s would dress, perfectly to say, "I am better than you." Black men after the Civil War would dress perfectly to say, "I am as good as you." So we have two different statements coming out of dressing well. Okay, skipping over a few things. Here's the 1920s. We still have this trend of dressing well. I picked these off the internet. Great pictures. Okay. Now, in the 1930s and 40s, a lot of African Americans, Latino Americans, Italians, and Filipino Americans began to distinguish themselves with this over-the-top dress. Now, let me show you. This is a clip from the movie Malcolm X, and I'll show you what I mean by over-the-top dress. It's about 2 minutes.
Well, I got a girl, she lives up on me. Well, the good God, it bring me love, but I know still. She shot like a black diamond. She shot like a black diamond. But she said, "Come on, soul." Well, you so beautiful, you got to die someday. Well, you so beautiful, but you got to die someday. Oh, but you can call me back away. Yeah.
Okay, that was the director Spike Lee wearing what was called a zoot suit, ZOOT, the zoot suit. And here you've got some zoot suits in history. You know, lot of just a lot of material. And a lot of young men wore the zoot suit. It was very fashionable as a way of distinguishing themselves. And as Spike Lee did, you have to strut around, and you wear a feather in your hat and this sort of thing. It became something that young men did quite a bit. The top you have famous singer of the 1930s, Cab Calloway, and he has this great song called "Dat Reefer Man," which is talking about marijuana. But anyway, he's wearing a suit. And eventually, there were these riots, Mexican Americans, Filipinos, California. And at one point, the zoot suit got outlawed. And then, okay, World War II happened, and material was needed for the making of uniforms and parachutes. So suddenly, it was considered a very wasteful thing as well. So there we go. Now, 1930s, there was the emergence in the United States of what was called the Nation of Islam, founded, then, but by the 1950s, Malcolm X, who was pictured here at the bottom, joined the Nation of Islam and became one of the great leaders. Why was he Malcolm X? Well, he said that because he was descended from people who were kidnapped in Africa and made into slaves, he did not know his family name. So, he basically became Malcolm X. The X is I don't know my family name. So there we go. Anyway, so the Nation of Islam, like Muslims today, emphasized modesty of dress for women. So women all dressed modestly. Yeah, there we go. And the men all dressed, impeccably like this in suits and bow ties, sometimes not. But they became like a tour de force in the fact that they're all walking down the street and they're all impeccably dressed, and this sort of thing. So it was the dress was a sense of empowerment. Now, over to Africa. And this is a quite interesting phenomena. We're looking at the Congo and we're looking at South Africa. So anyway, we start again with colonialism. Europeans, it was the Belgians who actually came to what's now the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and they did not want to see the nakedness or the near nakedness of the Africans. So in order for them to be house servants, they made them into house servants. They gave them their hand-me-down clothing. Now you would think that the Africans did not like this, but actually they did. They thought, wow, this is great. And they became became sort of a symbolism of eliteness amongst the Africans at the time. And then by the 1920s, okay, they'd had it with secondhand, hand-me-down, clothing. So they wanted the latest thing. They wanted the latest thing from Paris, the latest thing from Italy. And so they started to send away for them. And here we have the examples of that. Now, these people are generally poor, and they would have to work very often about 2 to 3 years to afford, a good pair of Oxford shoes or Baswesian shoes, any of the very expensive type. And of course, they would come in the mail, and this was great. And they would have to work probably a couple of years to buy the suit and the tie and the shirt. But once they got the outfit together, they would just strut. And, sometimes it was the over the top colors, like this guy in the pink at the bottom. But they would strut down the streets of Kinshasa and Brazzaville. You could see this, there on YouTube if you just put Sape, SAPE, Sape Congo. You'll probably get some interesting videos of them. They're walking down the street and everybody's saying, "Hey, how you doing? How's things?" And of course, it's a sense of absolute pride. Now, very similarly, we go down to South Africa. We have the Swenkas. And here it's, again, they're poor. These are Zulu men, and they had to work quite a bit for a pair of shoes, and they sort of had the over-the-top designs. Like I like the yellow pants here a lot. So they basically would, dress well, strut around the street, etc. Now, South Africa was, one of the most racist countries in the world. Between 1948 and 1994, there was a system of apartheid, which was absolutely awful. Won't go into detail, but basically there were white-only sidewalks, white-only schools, etc. Absolute segregation. Until Nelson Mandela became prime minister and dismantled apartheid at all. But the Zulu people were poor, oppressed, abused, and this was a sense of empowerment. So what they do is they would not only strut around, but there would be lots of lots of contests. And so, okay, we're having, this gentleman, he comes onto the stage, he struts, he shows his clothing, and then they'll declare a winner, and so you could be the winner of a contest, a Swenka contest, and that was a sense of pride. Now, to sum all that up, so we have different types of dandyism. So here are the dandies that I covered: the macaroni, the British dandy, the African American dandy, the Nation of Islam, not really dandies, but I just included them. The sape and the swenka. And here are the reasoning, which is all quite different. To make fun of their class, to rebel against egalitarianism, for empowerment, for pride and dignity, and again, for pride and dignity. So there we go. Different, impeccably dressed men through history and across culture, different types entirely. Now, I'm going to leave this PowerPoint. Yeah, that's the last slide. And I'm going to go with the next PowerPoint if I can find it. There we go. All right, the meaning of clothing. Come on, get up there. All right, there we go. Here's I found a site called Bad Prom Pictures, and here's a bad prom picture. Anyway, but the meaning of clothing. Now, I'm going to be skipping over this PowerPoint because it's like 70 slides, and I'm not going to show them all to you. But Margaret Maynard, 2004, has this wonderful quote in her book called "Dress and Globalization." Notice the S in globalization, she's British. Garments have no intrinsic meaning in themselves, but are available for interpretation and reinterpretation based upon their particular uses, social circumstances, and social evaluation, all of which are dependent on context rather. So basically what she's saying is that, the clothes does not have any meaning, but the meaning is given to them based upon the culture, based upon the context, based upon circumstances, etc. All right, let's skip over these, a few things. Here's an interesting study done 1997. Some sociologists, Freitas, Kaiser, etc., but they surveyed 300 American college students upon their least favorite clothing. What kind of clothing do you not wear, anymore, etc.? And in their interviews, they identified a number of themes, and I think all of us can probably relate to these themes. The first one you want to do is that you want to distance yourself from older generations. You don't want to look like your parents. You wanted to remain, you want to remain young and youth-oriented in a youth-oriented society. And the clothing of the older generation was associated with being out of touch and out of date. And back in my days, the big thing was bell-bottom trousers, right? So we wore bell-bottom trousers, and it distinguished ourselves from our parents. That's my phone. I apologize. Okay. So that's one thing. That's one theme that came out of this. The other thing is distancing from trendiness. You don't want to be looked at as too trendy because they thought that people would think them as frivolous and empty-headed, if you got with the latest trends or the latest fads. So, they would kind of wait around a while, and if it still sticks, then maybe they would buy it, kind of thing. You also want to, as you grow up, you distance yourself from past identification. Now, back in those days, I remember they're interviewing in the 1990s. They rejected any fashion of their youth, such as punk rock. So, when you were 15, you dressed in punk rock. But now, here you are, you're in college now, you're 24, 25 years old, you're more mature, you've moved on, and you want to identify with what you consider more sophisticated groups. So you're no longer a teenager, so you want to distance yourself from any of that teenage stuff that that you thought was really cool back then, but it's not cool. So it's basically a transition from what you were to who you are now, and that goes on. Gender roles and sexual orientation. This is interesting. Remember, this was the 1990s, and these were American college students. But the men wanted to distance themselves from anything that was
Dr. David, do you have a slide on gender roles? Because we could see summary of dandyism slide.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, just a minute. I think so. You see two slides at the same time?
I'm only seeing summary of dandyism.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Let me try and fix that. 1 second. So sorry. Yeah. All right. So get rid of that. All right. Now share screen again. That's what I should have done. There we are. Okay, can you see that? It says
Yes,
gender.
yes, we can see. We
Okay,
can see that. Thank you.
okay. I'm so sorry. That was so. Thank you for listening politely and 5 minutes. So here we go. So gender roles and sexual orientation. American cultures, they didn't want to be thought of as gay. So anything that fit too nicely, anything that was too neat, anything that was pink, or anything like that, they kind of rejected it, which is really interesting because, what they're saying is, well, I don't want to be too neat and too well groomed because people are going to think I'm gay, so I have to slob it up a little bit, kind of thing. Uh, okay. Finally, in this study is the desire not to dress like people of another race. So basically, they didn't want to be seen as supporting the values of belief or trying to be black or trying to be white or trying to be anything else. Um, African American men did not want to be seen as conforming to the white majority, being what they called an Oreo cookie. What is an Oreo cookie? And I remember this is their definition. It's black on the outside, white on the inside. So there we go. White men at the same time did not want to be seen as trying to be black. So they did not wear clothing they thought would give off that impression. Now, Korean and Korean American students did not want to appear in Western styles because they thought that they were too immodest. Excuse me. So no halter tops and campus and this sort of thing. Finally, you want to distance yourself from stereotypes. African Americans said I did not want to be mistaken for a gangster type. Asian Americans said I did not want to be, thought of as, and this is a derogatory term, fresh off the boat. So basically, they, consider that in their dress as well. So these are the things that young people considered in their dress. Now, moving on, moving on. The difference, just shortly, the difference between a fad and a trend. Um, a fad is something that comes and becomes really, really popular very, very quickly, and then it disappears just as quickly. And here are some fads. In the early 2000s, women were wearing what was called the whale tail. And when they bent down to pick up their books, this is what you would see. So that was like for a year, but then it disappeared. 1990s, at one point, I remember that everybody's wearing orange velour, and that's kind of disappeared. And then the 1980s, everybody's wearing leg warmers. These are fads. So a fad comes, goes. A trend, on the other hand, is something that begins slowly, uh, and then sticks around for a long, long time. So that is a trend. Fake fur coats, they were a fad. Women wearing pants is a trend because that didn't really start until the 1920s or 1930s. Movie stars like Katharine Hepburn and Marlene Dietrich, were famous for the fact that they wore pants. Now today everybody wears pants, right? But back then it was, it would sort of raise some eyebrows if a woman was walking down the street wearing pants instead of a dress. But now, it came about and it's sticking around and it's not going away either. So anyway, that's a trend. Okay. Here's a pair of jeans that you may want to buy on your next shopping trip if you can afford them. That they're worth $250,000, mostly because of the bling surrounding them. I think if I was spending $250,000 on jeans, I'd probably want some that are not ripped. Anyway, there we go. But now notice the irony of clothing as it comes out. It is getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper to look upper class, and it is getting more and more and more expensive to look working class. So you can probably, if you looked around, you can probably buy a man's suit for $99 somewhere, maybe $129. You can get, a pair of pants and a suit. It's not going to fit well. It's going to look like this guy, but it's maybe $129. But if you go to the Chinook Mall and if you go into Armani, you're going to find a flimsy T-shirt that you could scrunch up and fit into your wallet, and it's going to cost you $80. Chanel is going to cost you $80. Armani, it's going to cost you 80, 85, $90 for a little flimsy T-shirt, right? You can buy a pair of formal slacks for $39, even $29. But you can buy a pair of faded jeans with holes in the knees and elsewhere for $339. You can buy a pair of formal brown shoes for about $49. You just have to go to Payless. But you can buy a pair of high top sneakers, might cost you $300, $400, $500 or $600 somewhere, right? So it gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper to look upper class, and more and more and more expensive to look working class. So what you have here is it becomes very expensive in the clothing that we wear to simulate poverty. It costs a lot of money to look like you're poor. And that is the ultimate irony. It's expensive to look like you don't care about clothing. Oh, I just threw on a pair of jeans today. Of course, these jeans are $500, but they have holes in them and they look incredibly casual. I don't care about clothes. I just wear these jeans. But you do. And so poverty becomes a status symbol in terms of clothing. Even the case of jewelry, it's the fact that diamonds have become meaningless in the fact that you can have zirconium, which looks absolutely like the real thing. Here are two pictures. One's a real diamond and one's a zirconium ring. I've long forgotten which one is which, but I mean, you don't need a diamond to look like you're wearing a diamond anymore. So you end up having to say, yes, it's a real diamond to everybody who looks at it. Okay. Now, looking at the symbolism of clothing, now we don't really have leather jackets anymore. I mean, they were, I mean, I haven't really seen them that much, but people still do wear them. They were very, very, very popular in the 90s, right? But anyway, the only people that wore leather jackets were fighter pilots during World War I. Because basically they were flying in open air planes in the middle of January across the English Channel, which must have been just absolutely freezing. So, but they kept them warm. So they were known as bomber jackets. By the 1950s, the leather jacket became associated with juvenile delinquents, and it was portrayed in The Wild One, Marlon Brando, Grease with John Travolta, Happy Days, the series. So, if you wore a leather jacket, you were kind of a bad boy. Let me show you. I think we might. Yeah, we still have a lot. Well, no, I'm gonna. It's called The Wild One. If you happen to, go onto YouTube and look at it, you'll see, Marlon Brando in a leather jacket. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to show you that. But anyway, so the leather jacket became associated with the bad boy, violence, lawlessness, Hell's Angels. These were movies in the 1960s. There's Jack Nicholson. Easy Rider was the famous film. They were also adopted by gay men. Um, Now you figure gay men, because of homophobia, have been called sissies and pansies for decades and decades. So this is a reaction to that, where they're wearing leather jackets and leather and motorcycle gear and everything else because of its symbolism of masculinity, right? So I mean, there's even entire bars where you see everybody might be dressed in leather. I mean, they're disappearing these days, but I think they still do exist. But the 1980s became associated with punk rock. You had to put, studs all over your leather jacket and write anarchy in the back of it, kind of thing. I'm just going further here. Um, but anyway, eventually, leather jackets lost their symbolism. So they were associated with bad boys, associated with Hell's Angels, etc. But then, they began to be marketed like this. And you see the bottom down here, and these are nice jackets. But what we have here is clothing that says, yes, I'm still a little rebellious, but it is a rebelliousness within the acceptable middle class, if you know what I mean. I'm a bad boy, but I'm not such a bad boy that you should be scared of me, etc. So you have this watered down symbolism so that the middle class will find it acceptable. So we've gone from, bomber jackets to bad boy delinquent jackets, to punk rock jackets, right down to watered down fashionable jackets there. So what we have here is, these things, and they now cost about $1,000 a throw. But, these two people, male and female, could say, look at me, I'm so rebellious, I'm wearing a leather jacket, but it's within the bounds of middle class. I think what I'm going to do is stop there because it is 10 to 12, and perhaps people might have some questions. But I could go on for a long time about the symbolism of clothing. So I wonder if anybody has any questions or comments about clothing. Etc. I think the most significant there is that it becomes cheaper and cheaper to look upper class, with a suit and tie, and it becomes more and more expensive to look, like you don't care about clothes, with ripped and faded jeans costing $300, $400, $500. So, are there any questions at all?
Go ahead, Chevy. Chevy, go ahead. Unmute yourself, Chevy, and ask a question.
Okay.
Oh, right. Sorry, right here. Got it going.
Hi.
Hello. My name is Chevy Rabbit. I'm a little rough right now. But I like this topic because I grew up openly gay, and I've explored my gender throughout my life. And I've often found society not evolved, and I found, like, even though I'm supported, loved, non-issue, no spotlight, no trauma around it, just really creative. And I started exploring my gender with male and female clothes. I associate more with the female side, but at times I go to the male side because I have positive male patriarchal influences, positive matriarchal influences. So I have no issue on the male and female side. I find it really well balanced. But in terms of how I express myself, it fluctuates over the years. Sometimes I'll want to dress more masculine, suited, more gay. I guess more flamboyant. And then there are times when I dress very female and passable. And then there's sometimes where I do a hybrid approach and I blur fashion with gender, to blur the gender lines with fashion. And I was actually featured on the Edmonton Journal front page, and it's actually going to be in the museum here at the Red Deer Museum as somebody who played with gender in the public sphere and fashion. So I really like this topic because it's I feel like it's been my struggle as an LGBTQ advocate and somebody who has often tried to blur those gender norms, but also somebody who has experienced as an adult, not as a child, because I was kind of very sheltered, but as an adult who's done it so publicly and has received extreme backlash on for trying to play with fashion. Like I'll have,
yeah, that's actually interesting. I think we live in really nice times in Canada, where if you look back in history, let's go back to the 1940s. A woman could wear a nice flowery dress, you know, and maybe stuff in her hair and that kind of thing. A man could not. A man was, you know, he was restricted to two colors, black or gray or brown, and it had to be certain clothing and everything else. Now, I mean, shirts, you know, that you find, you know, have wonderful colors on them, and you know, and they have these nice cuts. I actually have a few of them. But also the fact that, you know, if you see a man and he decides to wear a skirt, I have a student, Sydney, and Sydney will come to class every now and then, and he wears a skirt, and you know, nobody thinks anything of it. He also has a beard, you know, so he's sort of mixing the two genders as well. But I think that it sounds like there's more and more and more freedom to do that. And of course, you know, traditionally our parents, our grandparents, our fathers and grandfathers were highly restricted. You know, if you wore a pink shirt, somebody would say something in the 1940s. You know, now, you know, it's, you know, it's a nice color. You know, so there we go.
yeah, and I also find that on another lens, so that's the general public kind of fashion, mainstream fashion, because I also worked at Holt Renfrew and I have a lot of fashion designers. A lot of my fashion designer friends are in museums. There's Lux Ready to Wear. I own a lot of pieces. But I also find within a cultural lens, as an Indigenous person, I've been trying to pave the way for Indigenous fashion to incorporate and be inclusive of two-spirit and gender diverse folks. Like I met with the minister, Tanya Fur, and we're going to incorporate walk a mile in a ribbon skirt. But I said, like, I'm two-spirit. I'm not, I cannot be the focal point of this ribbon skirt, but I can be on a side. I can organize the structure of this cause and this movement and do all the policies, but I cannot be the spokesperson for this article of this ribbon skirt, right? Because it's female led. And I said I can be the support around it, but I wear ribbon skirts as well. And I encourage other gender diverse people to wear ribbon skirts, article of clothing. And so I find even within minority groups, we're trying to push the boundaries of fashion, of what's appropriate and what's not.
Will this be an event somewhere?
Yeah, it's in September. Yeah, it's what's it's going to be. We're looking right now. We're having meetings with their staff. So 100% at the Legislature of Alberta, they're going to proclaim a date in September, probably the 27th. I haven't decided yet. Walk a mile in a ribbon skirt day. And then it's going to have all Indigenous women, the minister, the premier, everybody there. Yeah.
I'd love to be there. I mean,
yeah, definitely. 100%.
Yeah, I'll look for it. Okay.
Yeah, and I had a walk a mile in a ribbon skirt with the City Hall, Mayor Sohi, and all of them too, the past 4 years, and Ashley Cullenbull. So, but I find that like within the Indigenous sphere, I find I'm also doing that trailblazing, trying to incorporate, you know, those different genders in clothing. So clothing is a big self-expression.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
By the way, is that your background in the back? And I'm seeing classrooms and everything else.
No, it's not mine.
Okay, it's cool. But yeah, it's you know,
My name is oh, sorry, but my name is Chevy Rabbit. You can Google it too. You'll see everything I popped up. CHEVI.
Chevy.
Yeah, Rabbit. And then it'll pop up all the different initiatives I've done over the years. I'm also a journalist as well.